This is the Week 13 video lecture on ethics and the environment. So in the first couple weeks of this course, we discussed what a moral theory was, and we looked at some challenges to doing moral theory. And the second part of this course, we looked at two very specific different moral theories. We looked at the theory of utilitarianism, and we looked at the theory of Kantian ethics. Then we moved on, and we looked at specific ethical issues. So we looked at the issue of capital punishment, and we looked at the issue of animal ethics. This week starts a kind of new chapter in the class. We're going to look at issues that are relevant to ethical thinking. So the environment and gender, so the role that gender plays when we think about ethics. The reading for this week about the environment and the role that plays in ethical thinking is called People Are Penguins, and it's written by William Baxter. And I think a great place to start would be to kind of clarify some things that Baxter is saying in this paper to make that a little easier to understand. So one of the things, from the very beginning, Baxter's saying something about the kind of claims we make when we do environmental philosophy or when we do any serious thinking about the environment. And he says that one of the problems with, and he thinks that one of the problems with a lot of thinking about the environment is that the claims are they're way too specific. So think about something like, we ought to keep the west channel of the Catawba clean. That's a very specific claim about a very specific part of a very specific river. And he thinks that it's very difficult to justify the veracity or the truth of those very specific claims. That means that it's very hard to justify those kinds of claims to other people. So if we imagine that claim, keep the west channel of the Catawba clean, it's going to be very difficult to justify to other people, especially people who don't kayak or paddle or enjoy that west channel of the Catawba, or who don't even know what the Catawba is. And so he thinks that instead we should think of these much more general claims, like, for instance, keep the Catawba clean in general, or keep rivers clean, and that these kinds of claims, the much more general claims, are much easier to justify. And that seems pretty intuitive, that seems right. So if we compare the two claims, if we imagine keep the west channel of the Catawba clean, it's not going to resonate very well with people who don't kayak or paddle or even enjoy that west channel of the Catawba. In fact, it's not going to resonate very well with people at all who probably don't even know of the Catawba. If you were to go to Oklahoma or Denver and talk about keeping this west channel clean, it wouldn't resonate with the people there. However, if you had a much more general claim, like keep rivers clean, or let's keep all waterways clean, that's a much more general claim that would resonate very well with a whole bunch of people. It wouldn't really invite questions of why or justification or reasoning. People would just kind of agree. And so this might be an interesting forum topic, something to bring up. Do you actually think that the more general a claim is, the easier it is to justify? Are there counterexamples, maybe very specific claims that a lot of people do resonate with? That would be a very interesting thing to write about. So the next item I want to discuss are Baxter establishes four very general claims. So these are things that he thinks resonates well with a lot of people and don't require very much justification. These are found on page 653. And that might be another interesting discussion topic, is whether those claims, those 4 points, really are the kind of general claims that Baxter thinks they are. Do they resonate with you? Do you have reason to disagree with any of those claims? You might even think about the way that utilitarians or Kantian ethicists might agree or disagree with them. The real meat or substance of Baxter's paper comes from his point that we ought to optimize pollution. And the idea here is that we shouldn't be concerned about creating a green state or getting rid of pollution entirely. The idea is that we should optimize it. We should create the best trade-off between human happiness or satisfaction and pollution. So the idea here is that we ought to prevent or mitigate pollution, lessen pollution, if and only if it does not treat people as a mere means, so we wouldn't be using people as a means to an end. And it lends itself to more human satisfaction. And this is the really important point. So if reducing pollution increased our overall happiness, then we should do it. If it means that we'll be able to enjoy the outdoors a little bit more, or we'll be coughing a little bit less, then we should reduce pollution. However, if it lowers human happiness or human satisfaction, for instance, if we have to take away everybody's jet skis, then it would be wrong to reduce pollution in those cases. So I've thought of a case that might help illustrate this point. We can imagine that there's a 1 square mile park with 100 trees, and a community is deciding what to do with this park. For every tree that they cut down, they would create enough space and enough lumber to construct 1 bench. So if there are 99 trees in the park, then there's room and lumber for 1 bench in the park. And on the other sides, if there is 1 tree in the park, then there's enough room and lumber to build 99 benches, and so on, and we can strike a balance somewhere in the middle. So Baxter's point is that we should optimize the pollution, the amount of trees that we're cutting down, and the human happiness that we would get. So obviously, if we cut down all of the trees, then there will be too many places to sit, and there won't be a beautiful view for us to enjoy. So that wouldn't create the most satisfaction or human happiness. On the other hand, if we keep all of the trees, 100 trees in the park, if we keep a pristine natural park, there's no place for us to sit down and really no room to move around in the park. So that wouldn't create the most human satisfaction either. Baxter's point is we should strike some kind of balance in the middle that would optimize human satisfaction. So we should find the right balance of trees to benches that would create the most happiness for the most amount of people, whether that's 70 trees and 30 benches, or 30 trees and 70 benches, or 60 trees, 40 benches, some kind of even split down the middle that would create the most happiness for the most amount of people. And this is an interesting approach to environmental ethics. Notice that Baxter doesn't think that the environment is valuable in itself. Like, there's no reason to save the trees just because they're trees. There's no reason to keep our mountains clean just because they're mountains and they're valuable in themselves. The only reason that we're motivated to reduce pollution or mitigate pollution is in case that it helps human happiness, that it makes us happier. And that's a pretty interesting way to think about the environment. I'm interested to see what you think about it, and whether you have your own solutions to finding optimal levels of pollution. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.